I'm Christina Wang from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and welcome to everybody. This is the, I guess, first annual Lamprey Technical Work Group / Conservation Team Technical Information Exchange Workshop.
Wow.
That name is going to stick for sure. That's going to be, I know. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. So there are two handouts that you should have. There's an agenda, which you were emailed, probably several versions of this, but this is the most recent and hopefully correct version of what's happening today and tomorrow. What you should also have is a speaker list. So that has the little workshop sections with the names of the speakers and the titles of their talk at least, and perhaps a little bit more information about their talk. So if you don't have either of those and you'd like one, the extra agendas are on the table in the back of the sign-in sheet, and I'm thinking, is the speaker list back there too? Or maybe they're all passed out. Okay, so hopefully everybody has one of those. Okay, so we are, in a second, Dave Ward is going to come up and is going to tell you about what's happening this evening after the meeting. And Brian is going to give a little bit of housekeeping things as far as water and bathrooms and that sort of thing. I'm going to check in with people on the phone. Who do we have on the phone?
O'Reilly from Sandy River Basin Watershed Council.
Wilson, Fish and Wildlife Service.
Kirk Hanley, Oregon Fish and Wildlife.
Okay. Can you hear me on the phone?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll do the best we can with the sound. For those of you on the phone that wanted to get into WebEx, were you able to do that?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
That's good.
Okay. So we have a packed schedule today. We're going to stay on schedule. Starting at 8:45, we have focal topic number 1, which is passage. And Brian McElraith from CRITFC is going to be moderating that session. Then at 10, we'll have a break at 10:15 to 10:30. At 10:30, we have the speed presentation section, which you'll see is a variety of different topics. And Dave Ward will be moderating that section. Then we are going to break for lunch. After lunch, we have focal topic number 2, which is eDNA, and Ann Groda will be moderating that session. And then we have artificial propagation at 2:45, and Bob Rose will be leading that session. And then final notes and questions and wrap up at 4:15. And then tomorrow we meet back here again starting at 9 for the last focal topic, which is translocation and genetics. And Kelly Coates will be running that one. So, Dave, do you want to come up and talk about this evening?
Thanks, Christina. I'm Dave Ward with HDR. I'll make this quick. Well, one thing for those of you who don't know me, I help Christina run the Lamprey Technical Work Group, and I've helped CRITFC and member tribes write the draft Lamprey Master Plan. One of the best things consultants do is buy beer. So at 4:30 today, we have a reservation at the Broadway Grill, which is on Broadway, and 17th, so it's a few blocks that way. I don't have an unlimited budget, so I recommend that you get there early before my money runs out. But having a little social hour after this is a good networking event, and also a good way to entice people to hang around and come back tomorrow. So anyway, we'll talk more about that later this afternoon, but just so you know right now, there is a networking event scheduled that everybody's welcome to attend, but get there quick because my money will run out.
Okay, so I think we are ready to go. So again, thank you very much for coming, and it's going to be an enjoyable day. How this is going to work, we're going to do the sessions. There's going to be a series of presentations in each of the sessions, and then there'll be plenty of time for those people to answer questions, to have kind of a panel discussion. The whole idea with this is to have an information exchange so that people from the audience can ask questions to the people presenting to find out information to find out how what they're doing can be transferred to your area. and hopefully people will get all their questions answered. Perhaps they can spill over into this evening's event also if need be. But that'll be the general structure of how it'll work. There'll be a few presentations and then plenty of time for discussion and questions from those speakers and just discussion amongst all of us. Okay, Brian, ready?
Yep.
You ready to do it?
Yeah, I got it. All right, good morning. So I'm just going to do a couple housekeeping announcements here. My name is Brian McGrath. I'm the Pacific Lamprey project leader at the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. So we occupy the 5th floor and the 12th floor. We don't completely occupy the 5th floor, and I'll say something about that in a second. But men's bathrooms are this way, and women's bathrooms are that way. So if you need that. There is a water fountain in the break room kitchen, which is just on the other side of this hallway over here. So if you need to fill up your water bottle, you can do that. There's also water and coffee in the back. So feel free to imbibe on that. We're not quite as draconian as the convention center yesterday, so that's a good thing. Welcome. This may be the biggest collection of lamprey nerds in the universe, so that's pretty cool. It's a good way to start the day. And if you're not a lamprey nerd, we should lock the door so you stay in here and hear all this stuff. So.
And later we'll have an award for the Lamprey Nerd of the Year.
Yeah, we'll have the Lamprey Nerd of the Year, so there's going to be some good candidates for that. So I'm in charge of the passage workshop, which is the very first thing we're going to talk about today. If folks were at the policy meeting yesterday, there was a lot of talk about passage, and it was a high priority threat throughout, in particular in the Columbia River Basin, and it varied from location to location throughout the range of lamprey. But getting fish from point A to point B is an important thing. The picture you see here just is an example of what these fish can do. This is the Bruno River, which is a tributary of the Snake River, Upper Snake River near Boise, early 1900s, and there's thousands of lamprey. This is not a good passage environment right here. So wooden crib structure with no water, that's not a good thing. So hopefully the talks that you see today will be quite the opposite of that, but at least it gives you a good sense of how far those fish were able to migrate in free-flowing environments and how many were able to get from point A to point B. So lamprey have a difficult time passing many of the ladders and things that are built for salmon. Their behavior is such that if you build sharp corners with high velocities, they don't do well. So their behavior hinders them in certain environments. But as the folks will show today and throughout today and tomorrow, if you can utilize lamprey behavior, it can actually be a benefit. They're able to use their mouth to suck onto things and move around corners and that kind of thing. So we can use their behavior to help them pass fish. So we've got 4 talks today. We've got some talk from California, from the main stem Columbia, from the Willamette River, and the Yakima River, which are all Oregon, Washington. So we've got the West Coast covered pretty well today. And the first speaker will be Nick Ackerman with PGE, and he's going to be talking about passage at Willamette Falls, or on the Clackamas River, adjacent to the Willamette River. Ralph, questions already? That's good.
Yeah. Is there a way to slide that? I'm just only able to see like 30%.
My head's in the way. Yeah, we can figure that out.
Easier to move you.
Yeah.
I don't buy it.
I do.
Nope. Well,
Is it my head that's in the way?
yeah.
Okay, so maybe if folks can kind of stand to the side, does that work a little bit better? That's a,
We have this microphone
Ralph, if you
too.
move right here, then your head will be in my way.
Cut your head off, Brian.
one other note about presentations. We've got about an hour and a half for this session. I told the presenters to limit their stuff to like 15 minutes, which is incredibly hard for all the work that they've done. I'm going to stand up at 15 minutes, so you guys have a sense of the overall timing. If you've got 20 minutes, that gives us total, that gives us time for presentations and questions at the end of your talks, and then hopefully at the end of all 4 presentations, we've got time for discussion. This wasn't designed to be a PowerPoint over and over and over type thing with no questions. We really want to have interaction. It's supposed to be an information exchange, so the information up here, we want to get it out there and back again. So feel free, feel free to ask questions, and we should have plenty of time for questions. And then speakers, I'll try to just give you a sense of how much time you have so that we have lots of time for questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Ackerman, and we'll get started. And just one other note for presenters, just do your best to speak into the microphone. I think folks can hear you back there, but folks on the phone, it's really important that they hear through the microphone. So with that, hand it off to you, Nick.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I wanted to thank CRITFC for inviting me to talk today. I appreciate a chance to get to broadcast the work that PG's done on the Clackamas River. So, as Brian kind of alluded to, our work has been on the Clackamas River. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Clackamas is a tributary to the Willamette. The mouth of the Clackamas is about 20 miles upstream of here. And then our project is on the Clackamas, 20 miles upstream on the main stem, on the Clackamas itself. So, okay, I just want to make sure the drop down wasn't covering our slide there. Brian, is there a laser? Yeah, there is. Okay. So, the topic that I'm going to cover today is in the early 2000s, PGE redesigned a fish ladder at Rivermill Dam on the Clackamas, and when we did that, we designed some concepts into the ladder that were specifically aimed at making the ladder friendly to lamprey passage. And so that's the overall concept I want to cover today. And then since that time, we've done some passage evaluations specific to lamprey, and so I'll go over those results so you get a sense as to what effect those lamprey-specific design elements had on lamprey passage. What's our success rate at moving lamprey over Rivermill Dam? Before I get into the specifics of the new ladder design, though, I just want to give you a little bit more geographic and kind of historical context to the project. So, as I mentioned before, for those of you who aren't familiar, here we are, tributary to the Willamette, about 20 miles upstream in the Clackamas. We have runs of spring chinook, winter steelhead, coho, and of course Pacific lamprey moving through the project. If we look specifically at the layout of the project, it's a three-dam complex. We've got Rivermill Dam as our most downstream dam. That's one we're going to be talking about today. But upstream of there, we have the Faraday Diversion Dam. This was the first dam built at the project. It has flooded out, washed out a number of times, but that was the first one built. It's an old project, began in 1906. The last dam completed was North Fork here in 1958, so we've been around a while. Rivermill was built in 1911, and at the time, when the Rivermill ladder was built, it was the first concrete fish ladder built west of the Mississippi River. And at that time, it was considered state-of-the-art. It was 80-foot high. It's an 80-foot high, 80 foot of head, and so at the time the Bureau of Fisheries asked us to build a ladder. PG's response at that time was, well, what's a fish ladder look like for this kind of dam? And the Fish Commission was like, well, we don't know, you're going to have to figure that out. And what we came up with was this. And everybody was pretty happy with that at the time, but as you can imagine, in 1911, this was primarily designed for Chinook, right? And it was nice that it passed steelhead and coho too. But Pacific lamprey were not, obviously, in 1911, they weren't concerned about Pacific lamprey, and if anything, they were probably more concerned about excluding Pacific lamprey. But obviously that was not a species of interest for them. So, state of the art in 1911, by 2006, its last year of operation, the state of science on fish passage had far exceeded the state of the design of the ladder, and so it was time for this fishway to go. Some of the design characteristics of the old ladder, again, this was taken just before it was decommissioned, you can see it was pretty steep. There was only 4 to 6 CFS of water passing through the ladder. A lot of ladders like this will have orifices for fish to pass through. This one did not, so all of the water is passing over the weirs here. You've got tight corners. You've got 90-degree angles on all of these weirs. Down here at the entrance, you've got pretty high velocities with tight angles on these weir gates here. And so generally just not good passage conditions for lamprey. And in fact, in times in history, there were efforts put into place to try and exclude lamprey. There were times when they hung chain link fencing inside the ladder to try and preclude attachment. So this was not a lamprey-friendly ladder, and I think probably the most insidious of all aspects of the ladder was the exit itself. This is a false weir that worked fairly effectively for passing salmon and steelhead. So what this does is there's an upwelling of water here, and this induces salmon and steelhead to jump over here. They would slide down this flume, and this is the forebay right here. Well, I think for everyone in this room, they understand the passage behavior of Pacific lamprey. If you're trying to exclude lamprey from an area, you might design something that looks like this. This is not an optimal passage scenario for lamprey. You can see you've got angles here. They're not really a jumping species, so this was just not an effective passage situation for Pacific lamprey. And this was the state of things for 95 years. So, 2005, 2006, we constructed a new ladder at Rivermill. In 2007, that went into operation. This was part of the new license that was issued to our hydro project. The license wasn't actually issued until 2010, but our settlement agreement had been settled on in the early 2000s, and we had agreed to implement this measure early. And so the new ladder you can see here, there's 2 entrances, one right here in the tail race, and one over here by the spillway tail race. And both of those come together down here. It's difficult to see, but then they serpentine back and forth, and they cross on the backside of the powerhouse, and then they serpentine back and forth all the way over here, on the way up through here, cross underneath the gatehouse and into the forebay. So it's a much longer ladder than the initial ladder was. Some of the lamprey-friendly design features. I guess first off, the velocities to the entrance are standard for salmon and steelhead ladder, 6.5 to 7 feet per second. Kind of general characteristics, it's a half ice harbor style ladder with 19 CFS. But importantly, at the entrance here, the corners are rounded with a 6-inch radius. And that obviously is to improve attachment of lamprey through these high velocity areas. Also, if you notice, once lamprey get inside, these corners are chamfered angles, and then even on this side it's rounded. And then too, if you notice, these gates that regulate head loss through the entrance, they're recessed into the walls so that it facilitates attachment through the entrance itself. Moving on upstream in this diagram here, so if you reference back to the previous diagram, this is the primary entrance. It's on the powerhouse tail race side. The secondary entrance is over here. The two come together, and then this is the diffusion grading where auxiliary water is supplied to create additional attraction water. And normally, in a lot of ladders, you'll see this grading is wall to wall. And that can present problems if you've got lamprey trying to attach along the floor of the ladder and they encounter that. It discourages attachment across the floor, obviously. And so in this case, what we did is we left a foot of spacing on either side of the diffusion grading so that lamprey can move along the floor near the walls Also, the spacing on the grading is 3/4 inch, so that prevents lamprey from being able to get down into the diffusion chamber itself. Moving up through the ladder, the orifices and weirs all have chamfered angles. At nowhere in the ladder is a lamprey going to encounter a 90-degree angle, and nowhere in the ladder are they going to find an open slot, like a bulkhead slot, anywhere where they're going to be able to encounter a gap that they won't be able to negotiate with, that will disrupt their ability to attach. The walls had a smooth grout finish applied to them to try and limit the I guess, lots of times with concrete you'll get this pop marking or pores. So in this case, the entire ladder was finished with a smooth grout. Again, just to try and improve attachment. Okay, so as I said, the ladder was completed, put into operation in early 2007. In 2013 and 2015, we did a series of passage evaluations. And in both years, we radio tagged some lamprey and we pit tagged them, released them in the tail race approximately half a mile downstream. And so in the first year, for fish that we had pit tagged, we ended up seeing a 96% passage rate. So that's the rate from release site to the forebay of Rivermill. Actually, that's to the pit tag antenna, which was part way up the ladder. But those fish, we had a sufficient number of fish dual tag that we were able to confirm that those fish then eventually passed through the ladder. But we estimated 96% passage rate for those fish. Radio tagged fish, we had an 84% passage rate. Essentially repeated the study in 2015. Pit tagged fish, we had a 94% passage rate. And then the radio tagged fish, we had a 90% passage rate. So across years and tag types, we'd estimate that generally we have about 90% passage rate at Rivermill. From release to forebay. If we look at passage times, so starting with ladder passage time, so this is last departure from the tail race to first arrival in the forebay. We see that it takes them roughly 0.87 days to negotiate the ladder. And if we look at dam passage time, so this is first arrival in the Rivermill tail race to first arrival in the Rivermill forebay. So that accounts for the amount of time it takes them to find the ladder entrance. That's 1.6 days, and the longest it took a fish. This is from the 2013 telemetry evaluation, and I picked 2013 because we had more radio tagged fish that year. The longest time it took a fish was 34 days.
Hey Nick,
Yeah,
is that flat spot, is that the searching for the ladder entrance on the right graph?
on the right graph?
Yeah.
This is just cumulative distribution, so most of the fish here, about 80% of them here looks like they passed in 5 days, and then there's a number of fish then that for whatever reason took a while longer, and then there's a group here that took closer to 18 days, 20 days or something here. So each
Yeah,
step.
so what's common about those fish? Is there anything
What's
that's
common
first
about
spot
those
there,
fish?
anything else?
I don't know exactly. It may have been some sort of environmental condition. The lamprey seem to be, if there's a change in like a cooling, cold front comes through or something, it tends to stop them. And so maybe there was a group that was released and water temps cooled for a few days. That may have slowed them down. I don't know. This is a 2013 data set, so it's a little bit foggy for me. But that's how the graph works. It's each jump up is a fish passing, essentially. So median was 1.6 days. The longest was 33.9 days. If we compare our passage rates to some of the other regional estimates, and some of these estimates are a little bit outdated now since I first put this presentation together, but I think these are probably reasonably representative. If we look at main stem Columbia dams, we're generally in the 40 to 80% range. Look at some other smaller dams around the region, and these are really variable, and I tried to pick reasonably comparably sized dams. There are some very small dams that I didn't include in here. They range from 0 to 80-some%, and Rivermill compares pretty favorably to the rest of these. So one thing I want to look at then was, or just show to you then, our metric of adult abundance. And we don't enumerate adult lamprey at Rivermill, but what we do have is, in years that we have run our adult trap there, and we run a trap for our passage evaluations. And the best metric that I've got to index adult abundance is our peak catch per effort running that trap. So I run it through the peak of the season to catch fish for tagging, and I think our best index of abundance is what is our catch per effort in the weeks that we run that trap and the peak of that catch per effort. And we see that through time we've been getting generally increasing catch per effort at that trap up to this past year. And I think this could be a regional trend too, because I think this year at other places, including Bonneville, we saw higher lamprey counts. But this year we had our highest catch per effort at over 5 fish per hour, averaged across that week. And then lastly, we have a juvenile collection facility at Rivermill Dam. Actually does a pretty good job of collecting amicetes and macrophthalmia coming down the river. That facility went into operation in 2013, and the first couple of winters we had some operational issues, so we don't have juvenile collection data until 2015. But juvenile collection numbers, in 2015 we captured very few macrophthalmia and amicetes coming down the river, but by 2016 we got some pretty appreciable numbers, and that was pretty interesting to us. We got over almost 6,000 that year. Then last year, and these are, I say last year, these are what we're calling a run year, which we classify as October 1st to September 30th. So for the 2017 juvenile run year, we had over 17,000 come through, which was really encouraging to us given how that compared to the year before. And now in 2018 already, through the end of November, we've already got over 12,000, and most of our juveniles are caught from December 1st through the end of February. So we're already well ahead of the pace we'd set last year at this time. So we're pretty encouraged by that. It's indicating that we're getting more fish upstream above Rivermill, and that they're producing more juveniles and we're passing them downstream. Yes.
At the beginning, you mentioned the amicetes and macrophthalmia. So are you distinguishing the two to pull that, tease that apart?
Yes.
So is this macrophthalmia or
In this particular graph, I've just combined them for simplicity, but we do have the data that separates them. At Rivermill, we have two different downstream sampling facilities. At this particular one, they're primarily macrophthalmia, and they move generally primarily December through the end of February. At our other sampling facility that catches them from North Fork Dam, most of our downstream migrants are actually amicetes, and we catch those more May through July. It's kind of an interesting difference. Okay, so conclusions. This was the original ladder was the first concrete ladder built west of the Mississippi. Had lamprey-specific design elements. The lamprey passage rate exceeds regional estimates, in some cases significantly. Our passage times are reasonably rapid, and our juvenile and adult counts are trending upwards. With that, I can take any questions.
Yeah, I've got time for a couple questions. The presenters, if you could repeat the question into the microphone so folks on the phone can hear. And one more housekeeping thing real quick. Folks on the phone, can you please, appreciate you guys calling in, but can you make sure you mute your phone? Thanks. All right, take it away, Nick.
So, passage at 90% is pretty outstanding. Do you have any idea what it is for all three projects?
Yeah, so you asked what the overall passage rate is through the three projects. The way our project is situated is we actually, once the fish pass Rivermill, then there's one ladder that takes them over the next two dams upstream. That ladder was built in '58, and our passage rate at that ladder last year was only 20%. So overall passage through the entire project would be something like 18%. And that's one, we're doing a lot more work trying to figure that one out now. And that's a whole nother presentation. But it's not as good of a story as at Rivermill, obviously. Part of our short-term solution there is we're running a trap and haul from Rivermill above North Fork Dam to try and help make sure we're getting fish up there in the meantime. Yeah.
Do you know if there's a lamprey angle that you said you don't do 90 degrees, but can they do 87 or 83 or 54? Or
That I don't know. The way the angles are chamfered at 45 degrees on the orifices, on the weirs and orifices, and I don't know what the basis for that was at the time, but that's the angle that was used, and we've seen a lot of lamprey negotiate that successfully. Yeah.
Yeah. So on your initial gate, where you're dropping the gate at the entry,
Yeah.
what was that designed to keep from getting a sort of a U-channel feature? You said it was smooth to allow continuous progress along the wall, but it looked like there was a U-channel that it dropped down into.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I follow your question. So you're asking what would the design have been otherwise, or how does the design work now?
How does your design work now, which seems to be...
Yeah, so typically you're asking, for those of you on the phone, he asked the question of how the design works for the bulkhead slot at the entrance gate. So typically what you would have is an open bulkhead slot that a gate would slide up and down in. In this case, the bulkhead slot is filled entirely from top to bottom, so that there's never an open channel with 90 degrees that the fish would have to negotiate. That gate is filled entirely from top to bottom, so it's smooth. It's smooth attachment no matter at what point the lamprey encounters that bulkhead.
One more question and then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, I'm interested in the performance of the downstream collector facility, and your counts are going up. Looks great. Do you have any feelings for the efficiency of that in terms of how many are getting collected versus going around, or have you thought about ways to approach answering that question?
Yeah. So the question was the collection efficiency of the downstream passage facility. That's something that we'll have to evaluate in the future, and we have thought about. Something that's interesting is, and I think they've shown this elsewhere, is that most of our fish tend to pass during high flow events when the river is turbid.
Right.
And so from that standpoint, the collection efficiency is interesting, although probably not entirely important, because a lot of the fish are going to be going over the spillway. I would say most of our fish pass when maybe only a quarter of the flow is heading towards the powerhouse, 3/4 of the flow is heading over the spillway. So I expect that our collection efficiency is relatively low. Most fish at that time are going over the spillway, and I would expect that spillway survival is probably pretty high. Now during non-spill conditions, then it would be more relevant to understand what your collection efficiency is. But then again, you're looking at periods when you probably have relatively low proportions of migration occurring. So it's an interesting question, although in the context of what proportion of the population passes during those conditions, that I'm not sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of its value in designing other passage facilities, that probably has some value, and it's something we'll be needing to get at here probably in the next 5 years or so.
Thanks, Nick. Give Nick a round of applause. So as we transition into the next talk, I just was curious about something. Raise your hand because we've got folks from all over the place here, I think. And just for the speaker's benefit, it'd be nice to know where people are coming from. So raise your hand if you're from Washington, you work in Washington. Oh wow, okay, Evergreen State. All right, raise your hand if you're from working in Oregon. All right, California. Let's go. Alaska. Idaho. Oh, we got some folks on the phone. All right. So a lot of different states. That's cool. All right, so the next speaker is Mr. Sean Tackley with the Army Corps of Engineers. So now we're going to zoom way out and think big dams, big fixes in some ways. And just a reminder, speaking to the mic as much as you can. We've got the Bob Rose Super laser pointer, so that should help you out. And away you go. Thanks.
Try not to shine it in your eyes. Thanks, Brian. So, show of hands, how many people were not at yesterday's meeting? Just to get a kind of a sense. So it's a good portion. I was there yesterday, and my senior colleague from our Northwestern Division office, Mike Langsley, did a great overview on the lamprey passage efforts that the Corps has undertaken for the last 20 years. And I had a little bit of a freak out moment. I didn't want to have the exact same presentation today, which I did have prepared. So yesterday afternoon I went back and I revised my presentation entirely. So if you see me kind of fumbling over my words and trying to figure out what it is I'm going to say, it's because I haven't really practiced this talk, but hopefully it makes sense. Brian, keep me in line in terms of time.
Yeah, I'll stand up at 15.
All right. So today I'm just talking about adult passage. That's where the bulk of the Corps' work has been. Mike touched yesterday on some of the juvenile lamprey work that we've done as well. When we're talking about adult lamprey passage at Corps of Engineers dams in the Columbia and Snake Rivers, we are of course talking about the lower Columbia River dams from Bonneville to McNary, and then the lower Snake River dams from Ice Harbor Dam to Lower Granite. Another subject that Mike touched on that I wanted to emphasize is that the Corps has been doing this in conjunction with our contracted researchers such as Mary Moser, who's here today, and folks from the University of Idaho and USGS for more than 20 years now. In response to concerns about declines, we started studying adult lamprey passage at Bonneville Dam using radio telemetry and pivot tables in the 90s, and also did a series of lab studies as well in conjunction with that. And this was just to establish kind of baseline metrics and try to identify where the bottlenecks were. A couple of key takeaways from that, and there's a lot more than this, was that we were surprised to see such low passage efficiency at not just Bonneville, but at upstream dams as well. Fewer than 50% of the lamprey that approach Bonneville Dam were making it successfully past the dam. And because we have similar metrics, anywhere from 40 to 70, 80% passage at upstream dams, as you can imagine, we have high attrition through the system, which is why when folks are talking about those NatureServe rankings in the interior of the Columbia Basin, that main stem passage is identified as the major bottleneck. A few other lessons learned from these early studies and later telemetry studies. Within the footprint of Bonneville Dam, we found that fishway entrances were a key bottleneck, probably because of the geometry of the entrances, like Nick was talking about earlier. Collection channels and transition pools, these are the segments just upstream of entrances where velocities aren't necessarily an issue. We're talking only 1-2 feet per second, but there's something about these segments, whether it's confusing hydraulics or presence of predators like sturgeon, something about these at Bonneville seems to be a problem, and not just at Bonneville, elsewhere as well. And for the most part, our overflow weir sections at our dams perform pretty well for lamprey. We have full Ice Harbor style weirs, overflow weirs with submerged orifices along the fishway floor at most of our fishways. And a key turnaround problem and bottleneck at Bonneville are the control sections of our ladders. That is the what we call the serpentine weirs in both our Bradford Island and Washington Shore ladders. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's on the order of 30 to 40% of the lamprey that make it to that point do not pass successfully through the exit section. In lab studies that were done, the NOAA team and U of I developed what eventually became those lamprey passage structures or lamprey ramps that have sprung up throughout the range of the species now, which is exciting to see. They also pioneered the kind of development of those passage guidelines that folks are using, the 6-inch radius corners, the diffuser plating, 3/4-inch diffuser grading to exclude lamprey from places we don't want them to go. And Mary can tell you all about that. In 2008, the Corps and Bonneville Power and Bureau of Reclamation signed the Columbia Basin Fish Accords with several tribes in the region. And there were, without getting into the details of what was in the accords or our 10-year plan or implementation plan, I just want to highlight some of the principles of the approach that we've taken since 2008. One is that no matter what we do, we need to make sure that we're not impacting salmon. I know it sounds obvious, but the folks who are immersed in this, our partners from the tribes, we often get frustrated with the balancing act that we have to play when we're modifying passage structures. But it's important that we not negatively impact salmon. We also knew that we needed to apply what we do know about passage. By 2008, we've been working on this for quite a long time, and while there were a lot of unanswered questions, we knew enough that we could move forward and lean forward on implementation, which is the next couple of points here. We tried to piggyback on salmon efforts where possible, especially at the John Day North Ladder, where we did essentially a complete redesign of the control section of that ladder and the entrance. And it should be said that as a engineering agency, the Corps is filled with engineers and scientists that are maybe more risk averse than some of us are used to. But in the Accords agreement, we knew we had 10 years to implement a lot and make significant change. We couldn't just study things to death, as folks were talking about yesterday. And there was a recognition that we needed to apply what we knew now and do our best to get on with implementation and do our best to evaluate those structures that we were installing. A key principle as well of our approach was to address passage where it's worse and where the greatest number of fish are affected. That's why you'll see the bulk of our work was focused at Bonneville Dam, although we have made passage modifications all the way up to Lower Granite over the last 8+ years. I'm not going to get into the details of all the designs. We've done a lot of work in the last 10 years. But fishway entrances were a major kind of cornerstone of the Corps' program. Everything ranging from the main stem passage equivalent of Stewart's $314 weir modification, so basically a 6-inch radius cap on our existing entrance weirs, to a massive experimental flume system at Bonneville Washington Shore ladder, to fixed entrance weirs at John Day North ladder and at Bonneville Cascades Island ladder. Nice rounded corners, a fixed weir that goes all the way down to the fishway floor that offers lamprey different options for getting in. And at McNary Dam, a kind of an alternative entrance structure, what they call the ported hood box, that allows lamprey to find a different way of getting into the Oregon Shore ladder. Expanding and improving on lamprey passage structures that were already built was another big piece of what we've been doing the last 10 years or so. We had a couple of existing LPSs at the Washington Shore and Bradford Island ladders at Bonneville. Mary Moser and her team installed an impressive LPS that extends from just inside the fishway, the new fishway entrance at Cascades Island ladder, all the way to the forebay, and we've been pleased to see that has worked really well. And most recently, the Corps kind of took over design and construction, and we just installed a couple of new ramps for the Washington Shore LPS that are intended to guide lamprey away from that problematic serpentine weir section where we see so much turnaround. And counts are preliminary, but we saw a lot of good use of that structure in 2017, the first year of operation. Lastly, just modifications to the existing fishways. So this is rounding corners, installing diffuser grading, replacing diffuser grading. And the one thing I'd really like to emphasize is that at John Day, I mentioned this before, but we completely redesigned the control section, the upper section of the ladder and the lower sections of that ladder. It's the one fishway that the Corps owns where, and this was actually a FCRPS salmon biological opinion requirement to upgrade this fishway. We integrated lamprey passage features into the entire ladder, and so we're hopeful that that's made some success. That was done between 2010 and 2013. It is, as this improving passage. Main stem passage is complicated. I'll touch on this a little bit later. But I put this together yesterday just to give you a flavor of some of the kind of complications we have when we're trying to interpret success. This is just dam passage efficiency metrics, which for us, we're using radio telemetry studies to look at the number of unique radio tagged fish that passed versus the total number that approach fishway entrances. It seems like there's a couple different ways that folks have been defining passage success. Bonneville still is under 50% as of 2014, the last time we did an RT study. We have one planned for 18 and 19, so we're really interested to see with some of these more recent modifications whether that's made further improvements. The Dalles, we've had pretty consistently better passage at the Dalles, and yet in 2014, for unknown reasons that we're still scratching our heads about, we actually saw a decrease in passage efficiency. So there's a lot of variability year to year, and there's never an easy answer. The one thing I'm really excited about, cautiously optimistic about, is that these are small sample sizes of lamprey that are tagged at Bonneville that make it to John Day for our evaluations there. But we've had a fairly consistent range of fairly poor performance at John Day Dam. And in 2014, it looked like we had 83% passage efficiency. And it also looked like John Day North Ladder performed better than we'd seen it perform before. So we're pretty excited about that, and hoping that when we do studies in 18 and 19 that we see that same pattern. A lot of you are familiar with the Bonneville Dam counts. I think a lot of folks in the region use these for management decisions, but also as an index just to see what's going on in the basin. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. A couple things to note. As many of you are aware, there wasn't any lamprey counting for a long period of time in the Columbia, unfortunately. I just wanted to point out the contribution of these LPSs to kind of overall passage at Bonneville. It's significant. A significant portion of these lamprey pass via these structures. The ultimate question, of course, is that dam passage efficiency, whether it's an additive or compensatory kind of situation. But it is a significant part of our counts. And Nathan Zorich, who is here today, can answer your questions about lamprey passage structure counts and nighttime counts at Bonneville. But I just want to highlight that counting at Bonneville in particular is very complicated, both the number of fish that are there, and these fish are, of course, more active at night. There's a lot of up and down movement at both Bradford Island and Washington Shore ladders. It's a problem that we continue to work on, and both the counting side of things and then also reporting and publishing in a timely manner. So a few key takeaways on our adult passage efforts. Again, those LPSs have been a real success story, I think, not just for core projects, but elsewhere in the region. And we've learned in the last few years that aside from being useful in kind of dead-end areas where we first installed them, where a massive number of lamprey are using them, we're finding that when we put them right in the conventional fishway or just inside a fishway entrance, which is Cascades Island is about the width of this room, I would say, and we have a ramp that is 18 inches wide or somewhere on that order, 22 inches. That a substantial number, thousands of lamprey are finding these and using them. Another key takeaway has been and I'll breeze through this, Brian, adaptive management. University of Idaho completed a really important synthesis of all the telemetry work that had been done over the years in 2013. And that really helped us kind of reshape our program and shift away from just looking at entrances and improving there to installing those new LPS ramps up in the upper part of the ladder with the idea of improving total dam passage efficiency. Documentation of design, keep track of your notes on when you're designing new structures so that we can share information across basins throughout the range. And make sure you're planning for long-term operation and maintenance of new structures. That's always been a challenge for us. Brian's staring at me, so I know I'm out of time. I'll just plant the seed and kind of maybe just leave this slide up here for Q&A. But I know lots of us in this region, and the Lamprey Technical Work Group has struggled with how to define success, not just at the fishway scale, like those of us from the Corps that are trying to figure out whether this little tweak to the ladder worked or not, but at the dam scale and the reach scale, assigning biologically relevant passage metrics and understanding what it means when lamprey aren't converting from one dam to another. What does that mean to the population, and what does that mean to your overall management approach or your priorities? It's something we continue to grapple with. I'll also note that it's been tougher for us to evaluate passage structures from McNary on up the river. I know the PUDs have struggled with this too. At Bonneville we have the luxury of having a lot of lamprey that we can tag and really understand what's going on. And it's tougher. You have to use different approaches higher up in the system. So that said, I'm over time, but
yeah,
questions?
I think we got time for probably two questions.
Thanks, Sean. Nice job. Just really a comment. One thing I wonder about, I think it's worth considering, is that while I think it's great the numbers have improved and you guys are doing a good job, I wonder the extent in the historical counts, how much more could those have been had labs been put in place. We know from the Willamette, below Willamette Falls and above Willamette Falls, when we release fish, there's lots of fallback and movement behavior to and fro.
Yeah.
And so I guess my comment is, those high numbers in the past may have been higher if fish hadn't been falling back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was something I should have mentioned, of course, was that kind of dotted line with the LPS counts. It is not apples to apples. And I would also caution that when you're looking at counts and using them as an index, we've changed the configuration of the upper sections at Bonneville, and anytime after we installed, I think 2003, I think is Bradford Island, and 2005 Washington Shore, somewhere around there. Counts after that, we fundamentally changed the dynamic. So is it a consistent index after that? I don't know. Good point.
Are there any updates on the effects of light in counting windows and fishways in the last couple of years?
No, nothing new. I will say that the project fisheries staff were able to this year, maybe this fall, in install blinds on the visitor center windows. Amazingly, it took about a year of them negotiating with our rangers over security questions, but because they had security lights at night that they insisted on keeping on. But they scraped together the funds to put some automatic blinds that deploy at night. But it is an interesting question about effects of light on lamprey. I know Mary did a bit of work on this in the early years and didn't see much of an effect, maybe, but I know with sea lamprey, depending on where they are in their life cycle, they respond differently to light. So I'd encourage folks not to assume that it doesn't have a substantial effect on behavior, especially if you're in the spawning tributaries.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks.
So next speaker is Damon Goodman from the Golden State, California. Before I get started, I wanted to let folks know that there is a white paper that was developed by the Columbia River Basin Lamprey Technical Work Group. It's kind of a range-wide technical work group now. Passage guidelines for adult Pacific lamprey and fishways, which is it's available. It's a compilation of available data, best practices, designs, and case studies put together by the technical work group. It's available on the Pacific Lamprey Conservation Agreement or Conservation Initiative website. So really that was an effort to get a lot of this basic information in one spot and then build upon that. So I encourage you to check that out, download it, and read it and all that stuff. And I will turn it over to Damon. Just a reminder, speaking to the mic as best you can. And you got the super duper laser pointer here.
Super.
And I'll stand up when you got about 15 minutes to go.
Great, thanks Brian. All right, good morning everybody. Here to talk about some of the work we've done on passage down in California. From our threat assessment, it became really clear that the primary issue that we're dealing with in California, similar to the Columbia Basin, is passage. So naturally we put quite a bit of effort into understanding how lampreys interact with man-made obstacles. And so this is some of the approach that we've taken to understand and develop solutions for that. And this image here was taken by the director of photography at GoPro on a motorcycle tour by the dam we were working at. And from all the images that I've taken, this I think explained the situation the best. You kind of get the perspective of the lamprey fighting its way up this fishway that was designed to provide salmon passage, but is creating an obstacle. I mean, we've got 90-degree angles, we have high velocity, and not just one, but 50 of these steps to get up and over this dam. And so it really kind of gives the perspective of the lamprey as it works its way up. You can almost feel him grabbing on and fighting his way up. I want to recognize Stuart Reed. We've worked on this stuff hand in hand, so really this is an accomplishment of both of our efforts on this stuff. So nature's obstacles. The Pacific lamprey evolved in systems where we have the Pacific plate colliding with the North American plate and creating this kind of rugged interface. And so to access high quality habitats in freshwater environments, lampreys have developed approaches for getting up and over obstacles. And so things like this are things that they're interacting with in their natural environment. They've evolved behaviors that deal with these things really well. This is an example from the Van Dusen River, and it's the extent of anadromy for salmon. However, lampreys get right past this up above, accessing habitats that Pacific salmon, even steelhead, the most athletic of salmon, could not make it into. And so I think that's important to recognize. We have other examples of this. This one taken in Hayfork Falls, also in Northern California, a tributary to the Trinity River in the Klamath Basin. And this is the site, as CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist, gave me this image that he had taken in a reconnaissance survey for extending anadromy for steelhead, and they actually came in and dynamited this structure and put in a fishway to get steelhead into higher habitats up above. However, when we took a closer look at this image, what do we see? We have Pacific lampreys working their way up a trail, up and over those falls, historically making it up. So in natural examples, what we're finding is that Pacific lamprey extend the boundaries of anadromy beyond what Pacific salmon historically would have made it in. However, in man-made environments, that's not necessarily the case. This is Cape Horn Dam on the Eel River. It's about 15 meters tall. It facilitates water exports from the Eel River into the Russian River Basin, where we like to use it to grow grapes and provide water for Santa Rosa, urban areas, this kind of stuff. It was constructed in 1907. And the facility was designed very specifically for leaping fish. Well, what do we know about lampreys? They do not leap. And this facility is the site of one of the longest term data sets for salmon abundance in California. They've been monitoring salmon at this location since 1922. Here's a beautiful steelhead. Scott Harris, one of our project partners, holding a beautiful steelhead here. However, when you're monitoring for salmon is not monitoring for lamprey, and so for over that time we had barely an indication that lampreys were even using this facility, right? Because what happens, you come into work at 8, you leave at 5, lampreys come out at night. Also, they can't make it up to the location where the trapping was being done because of the ladder. And so you would occasionally see lampreys around, but you didn't really know what was going on. But that changed. They did some experimental releases from an upstream dam, Scott Dam, the storage reservoir that feeds the diversion. And they were monitoring for salmon at a different time of year. They were doing a different management action where they send this pulse of water down the river to encourage salmon outmigration. However, what did they get? Pacific lamprey was the biggest biological response that they found from this. And here's a tube trap that was designed to catch downstream migrating salmon that was placed at the bottom of the fishway. It got clogged with lampreys, absolutely clogged. If you ever wonder how many lampreys you can fit in a tube, it's about 75. So Scott Harris noticed this. He's working this thing by himself, and he's like, what is going on? He spent the next 3 days with buckets running lampreys up and over the dam, and he ended up with 600 lampreys from that one event. And he's like, it just kind of changed the whole paradigm of the biology of this spot. Since then, we've also recognized that fishways are not just a threat to lampreys based on migration success or the amount of time it takes salmon to get over. Let's see if we've got an otter swimming around with a lamprey hanging out of his mouth. Let's see if this works for us. This is a video we took from last year. And we've got images that we set up a trail cam, and over and over and over this is going on. At this upper image, I'll save you the video on that, but that's a bear doing the exact same thing. And so this is really setting the stage for predation on the species because of their difficulties making it up the fishway. So it kind of attracts all these different predators to the situation. So based on all this, we thought this was a great place to establish a lamprey research station. We've now turned this a Northern California Lamprey Passage Research Station. You're all welcome to come down. We're going to host an event here next spring when the lampreys are running, and I hope folks that are thinking about lamprey passage from all over the place come down and share their ideas. So that get a hold of me, or I'll try and get something out to folks if you're interested in coming down and seeing what we have going on. This is another image of the station.
and the fishway goes up and around here. Here's the trap, and then back up and over the dam that way. So that's the current fishway design. So to work on a solution on how to approach providing passage for the lampreys above this, we developed an assessment framework where we tested different ideas of things that have been proposed to provide improvements for lamprey passage, or new ideas that we had of things that could be implemented to improve passage. We took a small section of the ladder, 4 weirs, and tested different approaches for providing passage, including, A here is the control, the actual current fishway design. And a lot of the approach on this was not, we did a tagging study where we used pit tags to look at passage success and the amount of time that it takes to go through there, but also one of the key elements of the study was actually sitting alongside the ladder and watching lampreys. And so just actually sitting there and thinking about how they're approaching the problem and dealing with these different types of solutions was a big part of the study that we applied. I guess I could review the different things that we applied. So this is the control structure. We tried just putting a gap under the weirs to give them access to the bottom of the fishway going over. Rounded bulkheads, we used pickle barrels to round out and provide attachment surfaces around weirs and getting rid of the 90-degree angles that are involved with the U-channels. Also corrugation, a culvert, is there a corrugation effect? Is that something that lampreys can deal with or not? A smooth tube, PVC, bought at our local Home Depot. And then little ramps with, 6-inch diameter ramps going up and over the weirs like this was another thing that we tried. We actually didn't end up running the experimentation on this because early on we put a few in and found that it wasn't working at all, so we didn't further the implementation of that. However, we applied a tag study for the other approaches. Give you some examples of the results. I don't have time to step through all of them, but here the pool and weir fishway was designed for fish that jump. We had velocities between 0.9 and 1.18 meters per second at each of those steps. What we found was a 95% failure rate for burst swimming up and over these structures. The climbing routes were blocked with these U-channels. And when successful, the fish would come up and over and then dive back down to the bottom of the structure. So those were some of the behaviors. Here's some lampreys trying to get up. They would often get stuck on the inside of these U-channels and they wouldn't be successful coming up and over. The rounded bulkhead, this was providing those attachment surfaces to get around those weirs. It increased the velocity, so that was one of the concerns. We talk about balancing the design concerns for salmon with the design concerns for lamprey. We have 3 species of listed salmonids using this ladder, and the last thing we want to do is cause more harm to the species that are already using, that this ladder was built for. So that was a major concern with this type of an approach. We did find that they rapidly moved around the pickle barrels. Once they got attached, they moved their way right around, no problem there. We did not observe any fallback on this type of approach. We did find that in our initial implementation of the bulkheads, the lampreys would find their way up and behind the pickle barrels and hold, basically rest in there. So that was one of the concerns that we fixed for the final experimentation. But if there's any holding spots, they'll find their way in there. And we don't want fish hanging out in these ladders. This is meant to be a way to pass fish through up to the top. So we found that was not a good approach. But one thing to think about, when a lamprey approaches a situation like this, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made by the fish at every weir. And so when you multiply that out by 50 times, that's a lot of time searching around for attachment surfaces and working their way up. So that was one concern.
So probably our most successful, or definitely our most successful approach was the use of a smooth tube. And here's a lamprey hanging out in the smooth tube. One thing to note is that when we're actually implementing this, we have about an inch of water in there, a little less. And so this is something where we used 4-inch PVC, readily available. The flexible stuff we brought in because it can be used to fit different contours and that kind of stuff, but really just a little bit of water in there, and we had no fallbacks in this. 100% passage success over one night was the maximum amount of time we gave them for this. And we had a 20-fold reduction in passage time in comparison to the control structure. And what we found is really implementing this, it was real successful. However, the entry and flow rate are very critical to how this actually works when you're implementing this type of solution. So getting down to some of the numbers that we came up with the passage study, we had 2 metrics that we used to evaluate success of these different structures. So in this case, we're looking at the probability of success, and we defined that. We gave them 1 night to make it over 4 weirs. If you can't make it over 4 weirs in a 50-weir ladder in 1 night, that is not a successful passage situation. So we cut it off at 1 night for this and ran a series of experiments. In both the culvert and tube modifications, we had perfect passage success. Every lamprey that we put in made it to the top in 1 night, whereas there was variation. We had somewhere around just over 40% making it over in the control situation. And actually the gap didn't perform significantly better either. So we've got some ideas of what they were doing in there too, but we can talk about that after. So passage time was another metric, and we were happy to see basic agreement between these 2 metrics in terms of what's pointing towards the best solution. And here you have passage time in hours over those 4 weirs of the different structures we tested. And so in this situation, the tube also performed the best with passage time in a matter of minutes compared to 5 hours for the control structure. So given all this information, who cares? What's the importance of this? What are you going to do with it, right? So now what? So we've got this ladder. We know we have lampreys stuck. We don't have a lot of money to do anything about it, but we want to get our lampreys past the structure. So what do? We took a tube and strung it from the bottom up to the top of the structure, about 250 feet of flexible PVC running up. And we've taken a look at that now with tagging lampreys and dropping them below and seeing how many make it into the tube and how many make it to the top. And also doing a similar exercise with the salmon ladder. And so we're seeing around 6% success of lampreys making it up the salmon ladder. And we gave them closer to a month to make it up that 50 steps. And our median travel time was 14 days. These fish were spending 14 days searching around, trying to get up. They just keep searching around, looking for different routes. Within the lamprey tube, we did not see any evidence of fallback, and it took them about 3 hours to get up that facility. So that's in operation now. We've also modified it to include a counting station. Because we're running them through this very confined space, we borrowed technology from the security industry and established a motion detection camera and a DVR in the field house. And so we have a count and a length of every individual going through. Last year, we counted 11,000 lampreys going through the tube. We had no idea this was going on at that amount. And so what we've done since I put this presentation together is that we have doubled our capacity. We strung a second tube because we wanted to say, hey, we need to get more lampreys through. We had no idea 11,000 would even try this. So now we have 2 tubes and we doubled our capacity. The total cost of both tubes with the counting facility is around $2,500, maybe $3,000 for the entire setup. And we see applications for this. As I said, passage is our primary issue that we're dealing with. We have fishways all across California. We see applications for this in other areas, and we're actively working on bringing this technology to provide access for lampreys and other systems around the state. I'd like to acknowledge the folks that helped on the ground with this. There's definitely a lot of people's, different people's effort in helping on this issue. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. The thing that I struggle with, if you could help characterize for me, is I don't understand how you can attract that many, 11,000, attracting them to that tube. How does that work? Because as I understood, you're only putting 13 liters per minute down the tube. Mm-hmm. How do they find that with all the competing attraction flow there? That just amazes me.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And for a while we were saying, providing lamprey passage is easy, you just got to do it. But actually what we found is that there's a lot of nuances to the designs. And so what we did, that was part of the observation process, is spending a lot of time down at the entrance to the fishway watching where the lampreys are naturally trying to get up. And then we provided access to the spots they were struggling to get up. And we've further gone to the measures of actually blocking them from getting into the fishway, because once they get in there, it's a ton of effort that they're spending searching, trying to get up. And so we blocked them out of there, provided tubes. We have different with the 2 tubes, we now have different locations where we have entries placed for different flow rates. CFS coming down the river, and so they have different options there, and they queue into each other. What we found is individuals will be, right when we put the tube in, individuals will be searching around the area. Nobody finds it. Within about an hour, one of the lampreys would find it, and then they all see that, and they all follow that path, and or smell, or whatever. They're paying attention to each other, and
you haven't really looked at that factor in particular, though. It's just observational.
Yeah. No, this is just watching the lampreys behave when we put these things in. Anyway, so it's something that they find their way up, and providing passage where they want it is key to that, and understanding how they're interacting with these structures.
We'll have to move on. Hopefully at the end of this we'll have time for questions for everybody, but we'll have to get on to Ralph's talk. But Damon will be here in the morning, right? So if you have questions, you can feel free to ask them then. So round of applause for Mr. Goodwin. Up next is Mr. Ralph Lampman, the man with the golden voice. Right, Ralph?
Yeah.
Let's see, where's your talk here? Where you at, Ralph? This one? I know. Okay. All right, I'll stand up 15 minutes.
Is a link? Yep, here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ralph Lampman. I've got a husky voice, getting over a cold, but I took some lamprey pills this morning, so hopefully I'll be recovered by the end. Want to thank everyone's presentation. It was really informative, and I want to pass on what we learned from our study here in the Yakima River. So, so acknowledgements. This is not. It involved a lot of people, so I want to thank everyone that has partaked in this. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provided the funding. BOR, it was their facility, and through their help, we were able to get it in. I also want to thank our team who did a lot of the monitoring at the trap and making sure they're running. And Jim Simonson, he's retired from NOAA Fisheries. He was involved in installing a lot of the initial LPSs, and he was really instrumental in getting the structure in here. So I want to really thank him. So overview, just pass on a little bit about the background of Yakima River, and then I'll focus mostly on the vertical wetted wall structure, their challenges and solutions, and other passage improvements that we're working on. So the McNary McNary Dam run is shown in the dotted lines. You can see they usually come in after midsummer. That's the fresh migrants that are coming in. But in these tributary environments, we get overwintered fish. Like in the Yakima, most of our fish are overwintered fish that are coming in the spring. So that's kind of the difference there. And this is, the counts for at Prosser Dam, which is a second dam on Yakima River. You can see, it correlates to the Bonneville counts, which is the dotted line. When you have a high count at Bonneville, you get a fairly high count. Well, highest was 87 in 2002, but it reflects kind of what you see at Lower Columbia. That's what we get in the Yakima. But just last year, we had a really big increase, 561 adults coming over Yakima. We started translocation in 2012. And just in the 4 years, we were able to see a tenfold increase, compared to the last year. And compared to, the overall count we had was 360 fish. So we got about 20 years worth of fish in 1 year, which was incredible. But our long-term goal is higher, 35,000 is kind of the goal we set based on the salmonid counts. And so we're hoping to get there one of these days. Our passage through the radiotelemetry study that Fish and Wildlife Service did are about 50% more or less. There's some higher passage rates in part of the season, and it depends on the dam. But overall, yeah, it wasn't great. So this is what we installed at Prosser Dam. It's the vertical wetted wall structure. Water height the wall height is about 8 to 14 feet. It's got about 60 gallons per minute with a 10-foot head. And this is kind of the design. It's got two parts. So there's a trap part on the left here, and then there's the wall part, and they're modular, so you can actually move them around wherever you like. It's about 9 feet for the covered portion, and then you can set the wall portion at whatever length. And we have 16-inch radius on the wall side and 11-inch radius on the inside. We wanted to make it extra wide to make that part easier. And then we have a fike that basically allows us to trap the fish once they come in. And then we have an inlet separation wall that separates it from the inlet of the water so they don't go into the inlet. And this is not the first wetted wall structure. There's been one on North Umpqua River, which has been successful in collecting fish. It's been tested in the lab, and we know that it works, but now we're just kind of setting it on the ground. So this is a video of what it looks like. This is one of the vertical wetted wall structures. So you can see it's not a huge amount of flow, it's just trickling down, but it's enough to attract the fish. So we have a center guide that allows if fish are coming from this way, they'll bump into it, and then if they're coming this way, they can bump into it, so they can go up. One of the challenges we saw was a lot of them were kind of struggling at the top end, and I have to mention these are overwintered fish, so they may have a little less energy than like the fresh migrants. So a lot of them were struggling at that end there. Oops. There's another video just showing it from the side. But it's been a long time in these spots. So what we did was we noticed there's actually a ridge line. It wasn't completely smooth, and that wasn't allowing them to kind of get to the next step. So we smoothed that out. We also added magnets. These are aluminum, so you have to put a magnet underneath to make it work. But that created kind of a diversity in the flow. And what we discovered is also when you have a lamprey, it actually, the magnet kind of imitates the fish, or the fish imitates the magnet. Either way, so they're, yeah, they look dramatically similar. And once we did that, a lot of them, when they get to this spot, they're able to go right on up. So initially, we just had a laminar flow, and most of the fish, I think they're keying into these kind of sides. That's where there's kind of a small little area of diversity in flow, and they're kind of using that to kind of get on up. But then we added the magnets, and that created a lot more diversity of flow. Areas where lamprey can kind of rest if they want to just kind of rest, and then keep moving up. And there's different sweet spots for different fish. They're not all the same. Some fish like kind of this particular flow. Some fish like these flow. So I think that's what it created is that diversity for them. And the other thing we noticed, this was coined by Jim Simonson. He called it the lamprey buddy system. It's basically these magnets are kind of like the lamprey. And so if you have a lot of lamprey, basically it's doing the same thing. So fish comes up and they kind of take advantage of all these other lamprey that are up above. And basically it shows, if you have a larger population, that creates more flow barriers. Flow barriers in a good term. It creates the flow breaks and enables them to pass better. And that may explain, like in the 40s, 60s, we had a huge number of lamprey, and the ladders weren't any better than what they are now, but they're still able to pass, and it might just be the fact that they help each other. They create flow dynamics that kind of helps each other to get them. The other challenge was escapement from the trap box. We wanted to make sure whatever gets in stays there, and all of these kind of were failures. They were able to pass through. Even with the fight system, they would find the hole and get back out. So we came up with a fight, kind of improved fight structure with zip ties and straws, drinking straws. It was actually Hito's. He was one of our interns, and he said, "Let's use straw." I didn't know he meant the straw. I put that to use, and that worked pretty good. The other challenge was there was an angle issue. So they would come in and they have to make a 90-degree turn to get into these trap box, and sometimes a U-turn because of the configuration of the trap. We didn't have a lot of space for them to come in straight, and so that created issue. That a lot of them would get to the top and then they would kind of mull around, sometimes even fall back down. So they just weren't going in straight. So one of the solutions, we just opened up that hole a little bigger, made it rounded, and kind of put a bend to it, or just added a curvature so that it's a smooth entrance for them. And we also kind of got rid of that sharp angle, so we tried to make it as gentle as possible in coming in. I think it's best if you can have a straight shot. That's the best way. But given kind of what we had, we just try to make it the best we can. Monitoring is something we're struggling with. We use Arlo wireless cameras. They work great. They're cheap, and they can. You don't need any wires. You can set it up, and they have the reception of 150 to 300 feet. So you can set it up in different ladders. From across. Weatherproof, waterproof, and excellent night visions. But the motion sensor is a passive infrared, so it's looking for a heat source, and these lampreys are like moving like crazy, but it doesn't get detected. So really need a different, more of an image processing detection to really get their movements. So we also use some of the audio detection. There's lots of heavy splashing when the fish are coming up, and that seemed to work a little bit, but we got these later in the year, so haven't really tested them fully. There's a lot of high bass noise that's also there. So basically I had to stay up, do a double shift and stay up at night and try to capture whatever I could, but I definitely learned a lot just by manually turning on the video and seeing what they're doing. Mechanical counter is definitely another method. There is some issues with the double counting or undercounting, but I think you can set it up in a way to minimize that, and you can get timestamps and real-time data if you hook it up to the internet. For our purposes, we really wanted to learn how they're passing, so we focus on the video, but we may transition to the mechanical counter in the future. So this is how they did. So vertical wedded wall black, and then the ladder. So definitely, we're not getting all the fish, we're just getting a portion of the fish. And we also wanted to look at the effect of adult pheromone and how they attract the fellow adults coming up. So we put in, we didn't put 75 fish, but we put 7 fish in each of the tube traps, and put 2 of those to see how that would attract them. And this is what the results were. So really, we didn't see a big difference in when the lamprey are present or absent. It doesn't seem to have a huge effect. Like we had another vertical wedded wall that collected no fish, and that one had adult lamprey in there as well. So it seemed like if it does affect them, it's just maybe a small, minor scale. And then later in the season, we really didn't get as much adults. I think part of the reason we had some high flows, and that's kind of what the wall looks like. It looks like a wedded wall all the way across, and really minimizes the attraction there. We also had some dead lamprey that probably got on up, but then it couldn't find a way out and died there. We also had, during the high flow, water goes above the cover, and that, the flow is still, hitting the surface, but it's probably minimizing maybe the audio effects or, the sound that attracts lamprey to find it. And these may explain some of the lower proportion that we're capturing in the later season. So these are where we set them up. It's on the right bank looking downstream, and this is where during the spring season, that higher flow, a lot of the fish were coming this way. We also saw some that were trying to go up a pipe here, so that's why we put one here. But what we found is we captured 0 fish at this point here. It doesn't have a fishway entrance, but we thought, during the high flow they might first come here and try to key into that, but didn't get anything. The one that captured everything was this upper structure right by the fish ladder entrance. It does show that, really there needs to be attraction flow for them and somewhere that they're attracted to be. And we set up another one on the left bank, and that's usually gets more of the low flow adults that are coming up. So we hope to learn more from the one we set here. There's been a little bit of modification in the latest one. So it has a pass-through mode, so it could just go straight through. But it also has a trapping mode. So you can see it has a plate that allows us to either be in a trapping mode or pass-through mode, and it's a straight shot on either case, so hopefully it'll minimize the mulling around. It also has adjustable weir so that we can control how much flow we want it to go through on the upstream, and because it's a fine balance there. And we hope to go Californian style with a flexible tube and create that last bit of passage through the trap. And a little thing, but we perforated the sides and also the top, because some of the fish during the high flow were actually coming in on the sides, but then once they get to the top, they just didn't have a good way to flip to the other, to the wall side, so we made it so they can't get up on that end. Just wanted to show you, vertical wedded wall is one way, but there's other ways. Wapato Dam, Sunnyside Dam, we found that some fish were able to pass on the dam surface, so there's definitely things we can do, like deflectors was an idea that Jim Simonson had, and we can maybe create a flow condition that's just, you know, slow enough in the right condition for them year-round to pass. But I think, you know, going along with what Nick was talking about, I think they're going to definitely use the ladder. You know, some will use the ladder, and we hope to get all the other ones that can't pass through these alternative means. But it's important to round corners and adding ramps whenever you have an opportunity. I think it's good to do that. I think we're running out of time here. So just talking about, you know, lamprey, they can go in small spaces. You know, overwintered one, I think you really need like a 1/2 inch to really prevent them from going into places. But most of the picketed leads, our grates are 1 inch, so there's a lot of places that lamprey go in that we don't want to. And that was, you know, what we saw at Prosser Dam. They went through the picketed lead, and they were hanging out on the bottom part of the ray, and they were getting detected constantly because they had a pit tag in them, and but they're using it as a refuge. So we just put a Vexar sheeting, and that prevented all the fish from hanging right there. But at Rosa Dam, the situation's a little different. They don't have an underside. It's just that they're hanging on the surface of the pit array, and because they're struggling to pass. So we have a kind of a half-moon PVC structure that we're hoping to implement this winter. It is an experiment, and we'll see how that goes. Look at that. We have another weir. So this is kind of a conceptual design, just aluminum ramp. Pretty simple, pretty low cost that we're hoping to get the funding to implement. So with that, that's everything I have. Thank you very much.
So I think we've got time for a few questions, and then we'd be, what, about 5 minutes late for the break. So yeah, a couple minutes or a couple questions for Ralph.
Yeah, Mary.
I have a question about the magnets, where you get them and how large are they in diameter?
Yeah, question about the magnets. Let's see, I got them from a local hardware store, I forget the name. But they had a bunch of different size magnets. I tried square ones, I tried round ones. Round ones seem to create the best kind of smooth flow transition, and yeah, they were a good price. Yeah, $2 a piece, or so inexpensive.
Any more questions? One more? Sue?
Just a quick comment. Can I nominate Ralph for Lamprey Geek of the Year?
Yeah, we can put him on the nomination list, so congratulations, Ralph.
Did you have any predation problems with on that little gap before they get into the actual structure?
There's a question about predation issues with the open area. I didn't see predation issues, but I was doing mostly, you know, monitoring through the video. So, you know, being out there, I've been there several days, but in those days I didn't notice anything. It is pretty hard for predators, you know, for birds. You know, they would have to, you know, come down from high above. There is not a whole lot of good place where they can, I guess, see them. They're, you know, but it's definitely, that's the reason we want to make sure there's a covered portion to kind of prevent that picking, but it could be a problem in places. So, yeah.
One more, Nick?
Do you know what the entrance efficiency? Do you know what the entrance efficiency is at that particular entrance at Prosser, where you put the wall?
Yeah, it was during the fall. The passage rates were pretty low. I think, you know, ranging from you know, about 40%. And then in the spring, it actually got a little better, maybe 60 or so. And so so we did find this year, we went, they cleaned that picketed lead area, and they found hundreds of lamprey just hiding in there, not necessarily pit-tag fish, but wild ones, and it turns out, like, I think the upper part of the picketed lead just was covered with debris and other things, so they were able to get in but not get out, and so there's still a lot of fish that are just struggling to pass there, and so we only have 1 to 2 year of data, but that's what it showed in those years.
Thanks, Ralph. I just want to thank all the presenters for cramming a bunch of info into 20 minutes. As you can see, we could spend a whole day on Passage, and so hopefully folks get an invite to Damon's Passage extravaganza in California. We can continue that. So